Starting today, I'll be working in the office. My name is Emily. Nice to meet you. When my ex-girlfriend Emily introduced herself to everyone at the morning meeting, I was genuinely surprised. I looked up at John, Emily's father, who was standing next to me. John was staring straight ahead. He seemed a bit displeased. My name is Alex. I'm a 30-year-old architect. The client wants to have shelves here, and also here, with this size. Before I could finish, John, the carpenter I often work with, interrupted. Got it. Here and here, right, and started tapping the wall. I usually call him John. John was quick to get started. I always admired how cool he looked. My childhood dream was to be a carpenter. When I was in elementary school, my parents lived with my paternal grandparents, but we decided to build a new house on the same property. I was amazed when the foundation was laid in the spacious yard and the framework was completed in just one day. After that, two carpenters carefully built the house. They let me watch the process from a safe spot after school, and I became friends with them. I told my parents that I wanted to be a carpenter in the future. However, my parents suggested that if I wanted to be involved in construction, I should consider becoming an architect. When they said that, looking at blueprints and floor plans seemed like a very attractive world. Carpenters need blueprints to build structures. I wanted to create those blueprints. In the scorching summer and the freezing winter, I didn't mind getting sweaty or having my hands and ears get icy cold when I was in elementary school, but by the time I was in middle school, I realized that working outside could be quite harsh, so I changed my dream from a carpenter to an architect. I studied architecture in college, got my architect's license, and joined a rather large construction company. While working, I obtained my first-class architect's license and have been involved in building various structures, but John, who works on site, always looks cool and admirable. After giving John all the instructions, I looked around the house. It's the client's precious home, almost completed. I designed this house while discussing various things with the client. As I was getting a bit sentimental, someone tapped me on the shoulder. Hey Alex. This house turned out great. John, the master, smiled at me. Thanks to you, John. I appreciate it. When I said that, John laughed even more. Want to make some shelves? John sometimes lets me help out on site like this. I'll pass. On places people would see. I declined with a wry smile. All right. The countertop base looks good though. This time, I helped with the base of the kitchen counter. You saved me. I had a backache. John said that, but I think he noticed my longing for carpentry and sometimes let me help out. You're coming to the New Year's party tonight, right? He asked, and I nodded. Don't get too drunk, okay? Your wife will get mad at you. When I said that, John scratched his head and smiled. John always drinks too much at parties, and his wife comes to pick him up furiously. It's a regular scene at our company. A few hours later, the grand New Year's party was held at a bar. As expected, it ended with John getting completely wasted, and our boss, Mr. Williams, calling John's wife to pick him up, as usual. I ended up waiting with him until his ride arrived. John was leaning against the building, dozing off. The cold winter night air pierced my skin. As I watched the street, a compact car approached and stopped in front of us. His ride had arrived. However, it wasn't his usual wife who got out of the driver's seat, but a stunning young woman. Her long black hair flowed, and her large, almond-shaped eyes were striking. She had thin but plump lips, and if I passed her on the street, I would definitely turn around to look. She wore a beautiful scowl on her face. Dad, enough already. Her sharp voice emerged from those beautiful lips. John, who was being called Dad by this beauty, was still in dreamland. The woman sighed and looked at me. I'm sorry for the trouble my father has caused. I'm Emily, his daughter. She bowed her head. I quickly bowed my head too. Your father always helps me out. I'm Alex. When I introduced myself, Emily looked puzzled. But, you're in a suit? She seemed surprised by my suit. John was in his work clothes, so I must have looked out of place. Oh, I'm an architect. John builds the houses I design. He always helps me with the parts I'm not familiar with. When I said that, Emily's eyes widened. An architect. I see, that's why you're in a suit. She smiled as it all made sense. Just then, John suddenly stood up. As Emily and I watched in surprise, John looked around and muttered, "Bathroom," and headed back into the restaurant. Emily let out a deep sigh. I'm so done with this. I chuckled. You're kind to come pick him up despite saying that. When I said that, Emily pouted. Mom refused to come profoundly tonight. She said she warned him enough before he left. I hate it because the car will smell like alcohol. Even though she hated it, she came to pick up her father instead of her mother. Her kindness touched my heart. With John not returning anytime soon, an awkward silence followed. I didn't know John had such a beautiful daughter. Are you really his daughter? Unable to bear the silence, I blurted out. Emily, who looked like a movie star, had a father whose features were large and rugged. Emily laughed a little, embarrassed. Calling me beautiful is too much, but I'm glad I didn't take after my dad. I couldn't help but laugh at that. Being an architect, that's impressive. Emily suddenly said, making me blush. Oh no, the qualification was tough to get, but there's still so much to learn. Things don't always go as planned on the blueprints. And I'm still half-baked. John supports me. When I said that, Emily smiled gently. You're kind to acknowledge my father like that. Her words puzzled me. No, it's not flattery. As I started to praise John more, Emily frowned and muttered something under her breath. That's fine. He's probably just as rough outside, right? He farts freely at home and burps wherever he wants. He's the worst. Rough. Well, maybe more like rugged. From a woman's perspective, there might be parts that are hard to tolerate. I found her family grievances endearing. Sure, he doesn't sweat the small stuff. But his work is incredibly meticulous. Anyone who lives in a house John built is lucky. Seeing my sincerity, Emily pouted slightly and said, I see, well, as long as it's not a bother. Her pouting was adorable. I glanced towards the bar. John still wasn't coming out. Gathering my courage, I spoke up. Would you like to exchange contact info? Emily looked a bit surprised. Oh, because my father might get drunk again, right? No. I mean, personally. I'd like to get to know you better, Emily. Despite my courage, my voice trailed off at the end. Emily's cheeks flushed slightly. Of course, it'd be my pleasure. We exchanged contact information just as John returned. He looked somewhat refreshed and seemed less drunk. Emily? Where's Mom? Emily frowned. You should brace yourself. John shivered. How mad was she? It seemed he was completely sober now. Get in. Ah, you smell like alcohol. We're driving home with the windows down. Sit in the back. Oh, come on. I was looking forward to being driven home by my daughter. Despite his complaints, John happily got into Emily's car. Emily bowed to me several times and said, I'll be in touch, before driving off. Watching her car drive away, I pumped my fist and said, yes. A few months later, Emily and I started dating. She liked seeing me in a suit, so I always tried to wear one on our dates. Since my dad's always in work clothes, I have a thing for suits and uniforms. She said this while linking her arm with mine, looking very cute. To me, John was a respected and great carpenter, but to Emily, her father wasn't a very favorable figure. Besides being rough, he never really played with me. On days off, he just lounged around at home. I was jealous of friends who went to the park with their dads. Now, I wouldn't want to go out with him at all. It seemed John hadn't participated enough in family activities. But it's nice that you can speak your mind freely. When I said this, Emily pouted. Not really, we don't talk much at home. Though it sounded like a joke, Emily and John's relationship wasn't very good. I pictured John's smiling face. I kind of envied having such a boisterous father. But I switched the topic to keep Emily from getting upset and enjoyed our date. My father was a strict man. As a school teacher, he brought his disciplinary role home. When I said I wanted to be a carpenter, he praised me for having a dream, but subtly guided me towards becoming an architect. Ultimately, it was my choice, but there was an atmosphere where defying him was unthinkable. My father passed away suddenly after seeing me graduate from college. His memorial portrait was stiff and formal, reflecting the strict teacher he was. The exchanges between Emily and John at the New Year's party were amusing, like a comedy routine, something I couldn't have with my father. Naturally, I was envious. As my relationship with Emily progressed smoothly and my heart felt fulfilled, I began to desire more in my career. I still wanted to become a carpenter. I knew it wasn't an easy path. I understood it required determination. But I still dreamed of building a house myself someday. This dream grew uncontrollably. First, I confided in John. John was surprised but said, "Why not? You've got a good sense. The work you occasionally do is always meticulous. Why don't you talk to Mr. Williams? We're short-handed on site." Hearing him praise my occasional help as meticulous made my heart swell with pride. "Well, if you work under me, I won't go easy on you. How far have you gotten with Emily?" His words made me nervous. I had told John about my relationship with Emily early on. Since I often worked with John, I couldn't bring myself to hide it. I would feel guilty every time I saw him. John was initially taken aback but eventually said, "I have no complaints if it's you," which also moved me deeply. I straightened my back and told him our relationship was wholesome. When I spoke to Mr. Williams, just as John predicted, he easily gave his approval. Mr. Williams laughed and said, "There are plenty of carpenters who want to get an architect's license. But it's rare for an architect to want to become a carpenter." It looked like the work adjustments would go smoothly too. Everything progressed quickly within the company, and I was in high spirits when I met Emily and told her over dinner. But it wasn't going to be that easy. When I happily reported that I would also be working as a carpenter on site, Emily's face twisted in disbelief. "What? Why?" She looked completely baffled. I explained how I had always wanted to be a carpenter since childhood and shared my past with her. But not once did Emily smile. "Isn't it fine as it is? Do you know how lucky you are to work in air conditioning in the summer and heating in the winter? Being a carpenter. In the summer, you'll be drenched in sweat." Emily is still not smiling. As I grew anxious, I tried to reassure her. "It's okay. I've helped out in the middle of summer before. You do get sweaty, but it's not that uncomfortable." Emily's angry voice interrupted me. "Who do you think is going to wash those sweaty clothes?" I was stunned into silence. Emily looked shocked by her own words. She quietly murmured, "My mom had a hard time. My dad's clothes were big, and he changed multiple times a day. It was a lot." Emily hurriedly tried to explain, but I felt the excitement inside me was cooling down. "You look so good in a suit. It's a waste. You're smart and can draw blueprints. Why after all this time? Would you want to become something like a carpenter?" The phrase, "something like a carpenter," bothered me. Don't look down on carpenters. Sensing my anger from my quiet protest, Emily apologized in a small voice. She continued hesitantly. "But, you know I don't like my father. I've always wanted to marry someone neat and clean, not like him, so..." Emily's father, who I respect deeply, was a carpenter. I knew they had no reservations with each other and that she disliked his roughness. But I couldn't stand hearing her speak badly about the John the First respect anymore. "I understand, but won't you support my dream?" I asked, and Emily began to sob. She was crying. "I'm sorry, but I can't be with you if you become a carpenter. Can't you reconsider?" As she asked me one final time through her tears, I replied, "No. I can't be with you if you won't support my dream, Emily. Can't you reconsider?" Emily nodded, and we finished our dinner in silence. Then, I drove her home. I dropped Emily off in front of her house, said a single word of goodbye, and drove away. Halfway home, tears started flowing, so I pulled over to the side of the road and cried in the car for a while. When I weighed my dream against Emily, I couldn't choose Emily. How come I couldn't stand up to my own father? I laughed bitterly and cried again. After that, I threw myself into my work. For a while, I was given fewer architectural tasks and allowed to focus on carpentry. John was uncharacteristically strict with me. I informed him about my breakup with Emily the next day. I didn't share the details. I couldn't say it. I couldn't tell John that she didn't want to date me if I became a carpenter like her father. There was no way I could say such words to him. John seemed disappointed but laughed heartily and said, "There's always something difficult with men and women." I'm disappointed, though. His strictness wasn't because of my breakup with Emily. He wanted to train me to become a competent carpenter. I could endure the strictness because I felt his intentions deeply. Most of all, I enjoyed it. I was happy to be building an actual house, not just working with a pencil or CAD on blueprints, or making models out of paper. Every part and every task is essential to building a house. Even the small jobs I did contributed to the house. That realization made me happy. Still, I had lingering feelings for Emily. I often wondered if we could have talked things through more. Maybe, given time, she would have understood. Why did I give up after just one disagreement? I spent days typing messages to Emily but never sending them. Then, one day, starting today, I'll be working in the office. My name is Emily. Nice to meet you. When Emily introduced herself to everyone at the morning meeting, I was genuinely surprised. I looked up at John, who was standing next to me. John was staring straight ahead. He seemed slightly annoyed. After the meeting, I asked John a question. "Why is Emily working here?" John, still looking grumpy, answered. Her unemployment insurance was about to run out. When Emily and I started dating, she was looking for a job. She had left her previous company due to conflicts and was mentally exhausted. Around the time we started dating, her unemployment benefits had just begun, and although I offered to cover all the expenses for our dates, Emily firmly rejected it, saying, "I'm an independent adult too. Let's split the bill." I liked that about her. Lost in thought, I asked again. "But why here?" I asked Mr. Williams, and he said they needed someone for an office job. That's not what I meant. I wanted to know why Emily, who disliked carpentry, would work at a construction company. Unable to ask John directly, I mumbled. John looked at me and said, "It's a life lesson. She'll be a burden, but take care of her." With that, he walked away briskly. There isn't much interaction between carpenters and office staff. But as an architect, I would have some interaction with her. Since there is only one floor for office work, whenever I work as an architect, Emily is on the same floor. This alone made things awkward. To make it worse, she would regularly bring me tea. While it was a nice gesture for my tired mind, it created an uncomfortable atmosphere. After spending a few days catching up on my architectural duties, today was my first day back on site. As I worked throughout the morning, I heard Emily's voice say, "I brought lunch." It's uncommon for office staff to bring lunch to the site. When I looked at John, he said, "I'm going out to eat. You get started on that other task after you eat," and quickly left. Today, it was just John and me on site. Now, with John gone, it was just Emily and me left on the site. John had clearly set this up. The awkwardness was overwhelming as Emily and I ate our lunch in silence. Only the sound of chewing echoed through the unfinished house. Emily placed her half-eaten lunch and chopsticks on her lap. "I was watching you work. You looked so happy." Emily broke the silence, talking to me. I nodded. "Yeah, it's fun. I feel fulfilled every day." I intended to declare that I didn't regret becoming a carpenter. Emily seemed to understand this and nodded slightly. "Do you have time tonight? Can we have dinner?" I hesitated a bit. But it seemed like Emily had gathered the courage to ask. She was slightly trembling. "My dad told me we should talk it out." With John's name brought up, I had no reason to refuse. "Sure, but can I go home first? I think I smell like sweat." I started to say I wanted to shower, but Emily interrupted. "No. It's fine. If it's you, Alex, it's fine." Seeing Emily's determined expression, I couldn't help but laugh. "Why are you laughing?" Emily protested with a red face, and I apologized with my hand. "Sorry, but I can't go into a restaurant smelling like sweat." I need to go home first. John might not feel embarrassed in front of Emily, but I did. Understanding my point, Emily agreed to meet after I went home to freshen up. A few hours later, Emily and I were at a slightly noisy family restaurant. I thought it would be hard to talk in a quiet place, so this was just right. The waiter brought us water and told us to let him know when we were ready to order. Emily had asked to speak first, so I looked at the menu while waiting for her to start. Emily bowed her head. I'm sorry for what I said last time. It was really rude. She apologized for looking down on my dream of becoming a carpenter. Since she had apologized, I wanted to say my part too. I'm sorry too. I shouldn't have dismissed your feelings. We should have talked it out more. Emily shook her head vigorously. She said that no matter how much we talked back then, we wouldn't have reached an agreement. The reason Emily had changed her mind was, the day after we broke up, my dad scolded me. On the day I told John about the breakup, he had laughed it off as if nothing was wrong. But it was different with Emily. As soon as she got home, her father, looking frantic, demanded to know what's going on, and told her that she wouldn't find another guy like me. I told my father that it was because of him. I was still upset about breaking up with you, so I was a bit irritated. And said I didn't want you to become like him. She explained, expecting John to explode in anger, but he didn't. Instead, he sat quietly on the floor and gave her a stern talk. He asked me, "Were you dating a suit?" That odd phrasing made me chuckle a little. He admitted that his personality is rough and that he must have made life unpleasant for me. He said he farts and burps at home, because he feels so at ease that he forgets he has a daughter around. But then he asked if Alex was like that. Just because he becomes a carpenter doesn't mean he'll become rough. He was right. Emily spoke with a self-deprecating tone. But at that time, those words didn't sink in. I was stubborn and insisted that it was Dad's fault for making me feel that way. John had apparently apologized sincerely. He admitted he wasn't a great father. It was surprising how straightforward he was. Alex, did you say something to him? I smiled wryly. Not really. But I did tell him that I couldn't say what I wanted to my father before he passed away. I said you can only connect with your daughter while you're alive. Emily looked down. I wasn't sensitive enough, even though I knew a bit about your father. Tears welled up in her eyes, and I hastily tried to reassure her. It's not like that. But I was envious. Even though you said you hated him, you and John had this banter that felt like a comedy routine. Even if my father was alive now, I wouldn't be able to joke around with him like that. But I know he cared deeply about me. I wish I could have spoken my mind more. So maybe I want to have that kind of relationship with John. I admire him like a father who allows such banter. Emily hesitantly spoke. If we got married, you could have that. But, that's impudent, isn't it? A single tear rolled down her cheek. After all the terrible things I said, it's too late, isn't it? I'm sorry, but... Emily forced a smile. When you were logging earnestly today, you looked really cool. Seeing her smile made my eyes well up with tears. Are you saying you want to be a family with the guy who chose carpentry over you? You think I'm cool? She had made her best effort to reach out to me. What had I done in return? I felt overwhelmed with emotion. Emily smiled at me. Alex, you really are kind. Her words left me stunned. Honestly, you have every right to hate me for dismissing your dream. No matter how much I regret it, you don't have to forgive me. What I said was terrible. I shook my head repeatedly. I'll wash my work clothes myself. I won't make you uncomfortable. Please, give us another chance. My earnest plea made Emily burst into laughter. After laughing, she winked at me. I'll make sure your clothes are clean, Alex. Her wink shot straight to my heart. Marriage must be about making these small compromises. I want to become someone strong enough to meet her halfway. And I want to live my life smiling with Emily. Looking out the window of the family restaurant, I saw people passing by. I want to be like those happy couples. Like those joyful parents and children. Like those calm elderly couples. I want to build a warm home. Anne. I want to protect Emily's smile. I smiled at Emily, vowing not to make any more mistakes.